In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world rests beneath a blanket of soft darkness, there exists a small town called Meadowbrook, nestled in a valley where rolling hills meet gentle streams and where the seasons turn with a patience that only the oldest places understand. This is a town where front porches still hold rocking chairs, where neighbors wave from their yards, and where the scent of honeysuckle drifts through summer evenings like a gentle promise of simpler times. The streets here are lined with maple trees that have stood for generations, their roots growing deep into soil that remembers the footsteps of those who walked here long before the first houses were built. In autumn, these trees transform the town into a painting of amber and gold, their leaves drifting down like whispered secrets, carpeting the sidewalks in colors warm enough to make the heart ache with beauty. The valley that cradles Meadowbrook is shaped like a gentle hand, the hills rising on three sides like protective fingers curving around something precious. A creek runs through the lowest part, its water clear and cold, catching the sunlight and breaking it into diamonds that dance and shimmer as they make their way toward the larger river beyond the town limits. Willows grow along the banks of this creek, their long branches trailing in the water like the hair of dreaming maidens, creating pockets of green shade where children have always come to play and where lovers have always come to walk hand in hand. The town itself is small, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else and where news travels not through newspapers or screens, but through conversations held over fences and in the aisles of the single grocery store. There is a church with a white steeple, a library built of red brick, a hardware store that has been run by the same family for 4 generations, and a diner where the coffee is always fresh and the pie is made from scratch each morning. These buildings cluster together at the center of town like old friends gathered for warmth, their windows lit with welcoming light when evening falls and the air grows cool. At the edge of this peaceful town, down a winding lane lined with old oak trees whose branches reach toward one another like friends holding hands, there stands a modest cottage with weathered blue shutters and a chimney that has released countless ribbons of wood smoke into the quiet sky. The lane is called Rosemary Way, named not for any person, but for the wild rosemary that once grew along its edges, filling the air with its sharp, sweet fragrance whenever someone walked past and brushed against its leaves. The oaks that line this lane are ancient, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches creating a canopy that turns the path beneath into a tunnel of dappled green light in summer and a cathedral of bare branches in winter. The cottage at the end of Rosemary Way has stood for over 150 years, built by hands that have long since returned to the earth from timber that was cut from trees that grew in this very valley. Its walls are thick stone, gathered from the fields and fitted together with a precision that speaks of craftsmanship and care. The roof has been replaced many times over the decades, but the current shingles are cedar, weathered to a soft gray that blends with the sky on overcast days. The windows are framed in white, their glass wavy and old, distorting the view just slightly in a way that makes everything seen through them feel dreamlike and distant. The cottage belongs to Eleanor Hayes, a woman of 82 years whose silver hair catches the morning light like threads of moonbeam, and whose hands, though marked by time, still move with the grace of someone who has spent a lifetime creating beauty from the earth. Her face is lined with the map of her years, each wrinkle a story, each crease a memory of laughter or tears, or the countless days spent under the sun. Her eyes are the color of the sky just before rain, a soft gray blue that seems to hold both wisdom and wonder in equal measure. When she smiles, which she does often, her whole face transforms, and you can see in an instant the young woman she once was, full of hope and love and the quiet certainty that life, despite its challenges, is fundamentally good. Eleanor's garden is legendary in Meadowbrook, though she would never use such a word herself. She would simply smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners like the pages of a well-loved book, and say that she has merely listened to what the plants wanted to become. For over 60 years, she has tended this quarter-acre of land, transforming it into a sanctuary of roses and lavender, of heritage tomatoes and climbing clematis, of medicinal herbs passed down through generations and flowers whose seeds came from places she has only ever visited in her dreams. The garden is more than a collection of plants. It is a living testament to a lifetime of love, of patience, of the slow accumulation of beauty that comes from hands working in soil season after season. Each bed tells a story, each pathway leads to a memory, each bloom opens to reveal not just petals and fragrance, but the echoes of all the moments that have unfolded here over the decades. To walk through Eleanor's garden is to walk through time itself, to feel the presence of all who have tended this soil before and all who have found peace within its borders. The garden sprawls behind her cottage in a beautiful organized chaos, with stone pathways that wind between raised beds, with trellises heavy with climbing roses in shades of cream and blush, with a small pond where goldfish drift lazily beneath lily pads, and with a wooden bench beneath an ancient apple tree where Eleanor sits each evening to watch the sunset, paint the sky in colors that remind her of her late husband Thomas, and the life they built together in this gentle place. The pathways are made of flat stones gathered from the creek bed, fitted together over the years until they form a mosaic that charts the garden's growth and change. Moss grows between these stones now, soft and green, and in places where the shade is deepest, delicate ferns have taken root, their fronds unfurling each spring like the hands of children reaching for light. The roses are the heart of the garden, though Eleanor would say that every plant here shares equal importance. There are old garden roses with names like Madame Hardy and Souvenir de la Malmaison, varieties that have been cultivated for centuries and whose fragrance is so rich and complex that a single bloom can fill an entire room with perfume. There are climbing roses that have scaled the wooden trellises Thomas built decades ago, their canes now thick as a woman's wrist, their blooms cascading down in waterfalls of pink and white and deep crimson red. And there is the peace rose, the most special of all, its pale yellow petals edged with pink, planted on the day they learned that Margaret was on her way. The vegetable beds are arranged in rows that catch the morning sun, each one devoted to different crops that have sustained the family through all their years in this place. There are heritage tomatoes whose seeds came from Eleanor's grandmother, who brought them from the old country wrapped in a handkerchief that still sits in a drawer in the cottage. There are beans and squash and peppers, cucumbers and lettuce and the sweetest carrots you have ever tasted. Their orange flesh so tender and flavorful that children who eat them here can never go back to the pale imitations sold in grocery stores. The herb garden occupies a sunny corner near the kitchen door, planted for convenience so that Eleanor could step outside while cooking and snip whatever she needed fresh from the plant. There is rosemary, the namesake of the lane, growing tall and woody now after all these years. There is sage and thyme, oregano and basil, lavender and chamomile, and the lemon balm that spreads so enthusiastically it must be contained by a low stone wall. There are medicinal herbs, too, echinacea and valerian, feverfew and calendula. The old remedies passed down from mother to daughter for generations, their uses written in a leather-bound book that Eleanor keeps on the shelf beside her cookbooks. The pond is small, no more than 10 feet across, but it teems with life that draws you in and holds your attention like a gentle spell. Goldfish drift through the clear water, their bodies flashing orange and white and the occasional deep gold that looks almost like a treasure coin come to life. Water lilies float on the surface, their round leaves creating platforms where dragonflies rest and from which frogs launch themselves into the water with soft splashing sounds. At the edges, iris and rushes grow, their reflections wavering in the water, and in summer, the air above the pond fills with the darting jeweled bodies of damselflies in shades of blue and green. The apple tree is the oldest living thing in the garden, older even than the cottage itself. It was here when Jonathan Hayes first cleared this land, a volunteer seedling that had sprouted from a core discarded by some passing traveler or perhaps carried here in the belly of a bird. Rather than cut it down, Jonathan built his cottage nearby, close enough that the tree's shade would fall across the back door on hot summer afternoons, far enough that its roots would not disturb the foundation. The tree has been pollarded and pruned over the generations, shaped by human hands while still keeping its wild heart, and now it stands gnarled and magnificent, its branches spreading wide like the arms of a grandmother welcoming children home. Beneath this tree is the bench where Eleanor spends her evenings, a simple wooden seat built by Thomas early in their marriage from boards salvaged from an old barn that was torn down on the other side of town. The wood has weathered to silver gray, smooth from decades of sitting, and the legs have sunk slightly into the earth, anchoring the bench as firmly as the tree itself is anchored. From here, Eleanor can see the entire garden spread before her, can watch the light change as the sun sets, can feel the day's warmth slowly release from the soil and rise into the cooling air. On this particular autumn morning, Eleanor wakes slowly, as she always does, letting consciousness arrive like a welcomed guest rather than an urgent demand. The light filtering through her lace curtains carries the golden quality of October, that soft amber glow that makes everything feel wrapped in honey and memory. She lies still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of her cottage settling around her, the gentle creak of old wood, the distant song of a cardinal outside her window, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen below. There is a particular quality to autumn mornings that Eleanor has always loved, a stillness that feels different from the stillness of other seasons. The air carries a faint chill that makes the blankets feel more precious, and the light has a slant to it that seems to come from a greater distance, as if the sun is beginning its long winter retreat. She can smell wood smoke from someone's chimney drifting through the air, mixing with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the last sweet breath of the roses clinging to their fading blooms. Her bedroom is small but comfortable, filled with the accumulation of a long and loving life. Photographs line the dresser, showing Thomas in his younger years, their wedding day with her in a simple white dress, and him looking at her as if she were the only person in the entire world, their daughter Margaret as a baby, and then as a young woman, and then as a mother herself. There are pictures of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of garden parties and holiday gatherings, of moments frozen in silver frames that tell the story of a life well lived. The quilt that covers her bed was made by her mother, each square a piece of fabric cut from worn-out clothing that still held too much memory to discard completely. Here is a piece of her father's Sunday shirt, there a fragment of her sister's favorite dress, and in the center, a square of blue gingham that came from the dress Eleanor was wearing the day Thomas first asked her to walk out with him. The quilt is worn now, its binding frayed, its colors faded, but Eleanor would never replace it with anything newer or more practical. It holds too much of her family's history, too many hands that touched the fabric before it was stitched together, too many nights of being wrapped in its warmth. Eleanor rises carefully, her joints protesting slightly as they always do in the morning, and makes her way to the window. She pulls back the curtain and looks out at her garden, and even now, after all these years, her heart swells with a quiet joy at the sight of it. The morning dew clings to the remaining flowers, catching the early light and transforming each petal into something jeweled and precious. The vegetable beds have been mostly cleared for winter, but the kale still stands proud and green, and the late-blooming asters create patches of purple and pink against the backdrop of turning leaves. A spider has built a web between two posts of the garden fence, and the dew has decorated it with tiny droplets that look like a necklace of the finest pearls. Eleanor watches as the spider moves across its creation, checking each strand, making repairs where the night has worn the silk thin. There is a lesson in that spider, she thinks, in its patience and its persistence, in its willingness to rebuild each morning what the darkness has damaged. She has always tried to live her life with that same quiet determination. She dresses slowly, choosing a comfortable wool cardigan in a soft shade of rose, and makes her way downstairs to the kitchen. The stairs are steep and narrow, built in an age when people were smaller and when the journey between floors was not yet something to be feared. Eleanor holds the railing firmly, taking each step with the careful attention of someone who knows that a fall at her age could change everything. But she does not rush, for there is nothing to rush toward, only another gentle day in a gentle life. The kitchen is the warmest room in the cottage, its heart and center. The old cook stove still works, though Eleanor rarely uses it anymore, preferring the convenience of the electric range that was installed decades ago. But she keeps the wood stove ready in winter, loading it each morning with the split logs that a neighbor's son brings by each autumn, and the fire it produces is a comfort that no modern heating can match. The walls are painted a soft cream color, and the curtains over the sink are printed with small blue flowers that have faded over the years to the color of a winter sky. The kettle goes on the stove, a ritual as old as her marriage, and she measures loose-leaf tea into the pot that Thomas bought her on their 25th anniversary. The pot is white porcelain with a pattern of pink roses, and though the lid has been chipped and raglued more than once, Eleanor would never think of replacing it. Thomas found it in an antique shop on a trip they took together, one of the rare vacations they allowed themselves away from the garden, and he had seen it in the window and known immediately that it was meant for her. While the water heats, she stands at the kitchen window and watches a pair of mourning doves peck at the ground near her bird feeder, their soft cooing sounds mixing with the gentle whistle of the approaching boil. The bird feeder is a simple wooden structure that Thomas built, hung from a branch of the crabapple tree that grows near the back porch. Eleanor fills it each morning with a mix of seeds she buys in bulk from the feed store on the edge of town, and the birds have come to depend on this routine, arriving each day at the same time, waiting in the branches for her to appear. Her breakfast is simple, as it has been for years now. Toast with honey from the local apiary, a soft-boiled egg from the chickens she no longer keeps, but whose memory still makes her smile, and tea with a splash of cream. She eats at the small table by the window, where Thomas used to sit across from her and read the morning paper aloud, commenting on the news with the same gentle humor he brought to everything in their life together. The chair where he sat is still there, pushed back from the table slightly, as if waiting for him to return. The honey she spreads on her toast comes from the Hendersons, a young couple who moved to Meadowbrook 5 years ago and started keeping bees on an old farm at the edge of town. They bring Eleanor a jar each season, refusing to accept payment because, they say, their bees love her garden more than any other place in the valley, and it is her flowers that give their honey its particular sweetness. Eleanor accepts the gift gracefully, understanding that the pleasure of giving is as important as the pleasure of receiving. After breakfast, Eleanor wraps herself in her garden shawl, a heavy knitted thing in shades of green and brown that her daughter made for her many birthdays ago, and steps out the back door into the cool morning air. The shawl is made of wool so soft it feels like wearing a cloud, and it is large enough to wrap around her twice, keeping out the chill that seeps into old bones more easily than it once did. Margaret made it during a winter when she was pregnant with her second child, her hands busy with the needles while the baby grew inside her, and Eleanor always imagines that some of that quiet anticipation was knitted into every stitch. The garden greets her like an old friend, the familiar sense of earth and vegetation rising up to welcome her home. She moves slowly, along the stone path, pausing to examine each plant, to pull a weed here, to deadhead a spent bloom there, to simply stand and appreciate the beauty that surrounds her. The stones are cold beneath her feet, even through the thick soles of her garden boots, but it is a pleasant cold, the kind that makes her feel alive and present in her body. There is a particular rose bush near the center of the garden that always draws her attention first. It is a variety called Peace, with blooms of pale yellow edged in pink, and Thomas planted it the year they learned they were expecting Margaret. Eleanor touches one of the last roses of the season, its petals soft as silk beneath her weathered fingers, and allows herself a moment of quiet gratitude for all the years this garden has given her. The rose seems to lean into her touch, or perhaps that is only the way the morning light falls, but it feels like a greeting, like a reminder of everything this garden means. The morning passes gently, as mornings in Meadowbrook tend to do. Eleanor works in her garden for an hour or so until her back begins to ache and the chill starts to seep through her shawl. She retreats inside for more tea and to rest in her favorite chair by the fire, which she lights even on mornings that do not strictly require it, simply for the comfort of watching the flames dance and flicker. The fire crackles softly, speaking in a language that needs no words, telling stories of warmth and safety and all the winters that have passed in this room. It is while she is sitting there, half dozing in the warmth, that she hears the sound of a vehicle pulling up her lane. This is unusual enough to rouse her fully, for she does not receive many visitors these days, and those who do come typically call ahead. She sets down her teacup and makes her way to the front window, where she sees a large white truck with the words Hartwell Development Corporation emblazoned on its side in bold blue letters. The truck looks out of place on Rosemary Way, too large and too shiny and too full of purpose for this quiet lane where nothing has changed for decades. It has stopped in front of her cottage, its engine idling with a low rumble that disturbs the morning stillness. The wheels have left tracks in the gravel that Eleanor smoothed just last week, and she feels a small flicker of irritation at this minor intrusion before the larger implications of the visit begin to sink in. Two men emerge from the truck, both wearing hard hats and carrying clipboards, and they stand in her front yard looking up at her cottage with expressions she cannot quite read. They are speaking to each other, gesturing at the house and then at the land beyond, their movements quick and efficient, the movements of people who have appointments to keep and places to be. Eleanor watches them for a moment, a small flutter of unease stirring in her chest, before she moves to the front door and opens it just as they are raising their hands to knock. The taller of the two men, who introduces himself as Kevin Mitchell, project manager for Hartwell Development, explains that they are conducting preliminary surveys for a new development project in the area. His words are polite but practiced, the kind of language Eleanor recognizes from years of listening to people who are not quite saying what they mean. He has a firm handshake and a bright smile, but his eyes are always moving, assessing, calculating, as if he is running numbers in his head, even while the pleasantries are being exchanged. The other man, younger and quieter, simply stands slightly behind his colleague, his eyes constantly moving, calculating, assessing. He introduces himself as Daniel Chen, the project surveyor, and he barely meets Eleanor's eyes as he speaks. There is something apologetic in his manner, something that suggests he is not entirely comfortable with his role in whatever is about to unfold. Eleanor notes this and files it away, the observation of a lifetime that has taught her to pay attention to what people do not say as much as what they do. Eleanor invites them inside, because that is what one does, and because she has found over the years that it is easier to understand people when you can watch their faces in proper light. She offers them tea, which they decline, and seats herself in her chair by the fire while they perch uncomfortably on the edge of her sofa. The cottage feels smaller with them in it, their hard hats and clipboards and business casual clothing incongruous against the backdrop of handmade quilts and family photographs and the peaceful clutter of a life lived slowly and well. Kevin Mitchell clears his throat and begins to speak, his words coming in a smooth, practiced flow that suggests he has given this speech many times before. The development, he explains, will be a new residential community. Very upscale, he says, very desirable. The kind of place where young families will want to settle down and raise their children. There will be a community center and a swimming pool and walking trails and all the amenities that modern homebuyers expect. It will be wonderful for Meadowbrook, he assures her. Wonderful for the local economy. Wonderful for everyone. He has brought brochures, glossy printed materials that he spreads across Eleanor's coffee table like offerings. The pages are filled with artist renderings of the proposed development, showing pristine lawns and modern houses arranged in neat rows, all identical in their newness, all lacking any trace of the individual character that comes from years of living and loving in a place. There are photographs of happy families, stock images of smiling couples and photogenic children, all of them looking out from the pages with the blank contentment of people who exist only in marketing materials. Eleanor listens quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face betraying nothing of the growing coldness settling in her stomach. She has heard these words before, or words very like them, spoken by other men in other trucks over the years. Men who looked at land and saw only potential profit, who measured value in dollars per square foot rather than in roses planted for unborn daughters or herbs gathered by great-grandmothers long returned to the earth. She remembers the orchards that once covered the south side of town, now paved over for a shopping center. She remembers the old Miller farm where she picked strawberries as a girl, now divided into quarter-acre lots that each hold a house indistinguishable from its neighbors. When Kevin Mitchell finally reaches the point of his visit, the words come out with a practiced smoothness that does nothing to soften their impact. The development will require her property, her cottage, her garden, all of it. But he has good news, he says, wonderful news. Hartwell Development is prepared to offer her fair market value for her land, plus a generous relocation bonus. She could move into one of the new condominiums they are building across town. Very nice units, he assures her. Very comfortable. Everything on one level. Much easier for someone her age than maintaining this old place. The words land in the room like stones dropped into still water, their impact spreading outward in ripples that touch everything. Eleanor does not respond immediately. She sits very still, watching the fire, feeling the weight of 60 years of memories pressing against her chest. She thinks of Thomas, of the evening he proposed to her beneath the apple tree that still stands in her garden. She thinks of Margaret, born in the upstairs bedroom on a snowy February night when the roads were too icy for the doctor to arrive in time. She thinks of grandchildren chasing fireflies through the vegetable rows, of great-grandchildren learning to walk on the stone paths, of all the seeds planted and all the harvests gathered, and all the quiet mornings spent watching the sun rise over land that has been her home for longer than these men have been alive. The fire crackles softly in the silence. Outside, a crow calls from somewhere in the oak trees, its harsh voice a counterpoint to the gentle sounds of the settling cottage. Eleanor is aware of the two men watching her, waiting for her response, their clipboards held ready to record whatever she says. She is aware of the pressure in the room, the expectation that she will respond as so many others have responded before her, with resignation and acceptance and perhaps a few tears that they will politely ignore while finalizing the paperwork. When she finally speaks, her voice is calm and clear, with none of the trembling that might be expected from a woman her age confronting such news. She thanks Kevin Mitchell for his visit and for his offer, but she will not be selling her property. Not for fair market value, not for any relocation bonus, not for any reason at all. This is her home. This has always been her home. And this is where she intends to remain. The words come out simply, without drama, without the raised voice or the angry gestures that might accompany such a refusal from someone else. Eleanor has never been one for scenes or confrontations. She has always believed that quiet strength is more effective than loud protest, that standing firm in your convictions requires no theatrics, only certainty. And she is certain, more certain than she has been of anything in a long time, that she will not leave this place where her life has unfolded like the petals of a rose, slowly and beautifully, and in its own time. The two men exchange glances, the kind of look that passes between people who have encountered an obstacle they had not anticipated. Kevin Mitchell's smile falters for just a moment before it rebuilds itself, wider and more insistent than before. He suggests that perhaps she would like some time to think about it, to discuss it with her family. These are important decisions, he says. No need to rush. They can come back in a week or two, after she has had a chance to consider all the factors involved. He leaves his card on the table by the door, along with a brochure showing artist renderings of the proposed development. The images show pristine lawns and modern houses, all identical, all lacking any trace of the roses or the lavender or the ancient apple tree. As Eleanor watches them walk back to their truck, she notices Daniel Chen turn and look back at her cottage one more time, and in his face she sees something that might be regret, or might be understanding, or might be simply the exhaustion of a man who has done this too many times in too many places to too many people like her. After they leave, Eleanor sits for a long while in her chair, the fire slowly dying to embers before her. She does not cry, for she has lived long enough to know that tears rarely solve anything, but there is a heaviness in her heart that was not there when she woke this morning. She thinks of all the changes she has witnessed in Meadowbrook over the years, the way the town has grown and shifted, the old farms giving way to subdivisions, the orchards replaced by shopping centers. She had always believed, perhaps naively, that her little corner of the valley would be spared such transformation. The afternoon light begins to fade, casting long shadows across the garden she can see through the kitchen window. The shadows move slowly across the paths she knows by heart, darkening the roses first, then the vegetable beds, then the area around the pond where the goldfish are settling into their evening stillness. Eleanor watches this daily ritual of darkness claiming the light, and she thinks about how many thousands of times she has witnessed this same transition. How many thousands of evenings have ended with her sitting in this cottage as the sun went down over her garden. Eleanor rises, puts another log on the fire, and makes herself a simple supper of soup and bread. The soup is from a batch she made last week, vegetable soup with tomatoes from her garden that she canned in August, and the bread is from the bakery in town, a small loaf of wheat that she has been eating slowly over several days. She eats at the small table by the window without much appetite, her mind turning over the conversation like a stone in a stream, wearing away at the sharp edges until all that remains is a smooth certainty. She will not leave this place. Whatever comes, whatever pressures these development people bring to bear, she will remain in the home she has made and tended for 6 decades. Before bed, she steps outside one more time, wrapping her shawl tight against the evening chill. The stars are emerging overhead, bright and steady, the same stars that have watched over this land since long before she was born and will continue to shine long after she is gone. She walks the familiar paths of her garden, touching the plants she knows by heart, murmuring gentle goodnights to the roses and the herbs and the sleeping perennials waiting beneath the soil for spring. The night air is cold and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from her chimney and the earthy smell of fallen leaves returning to the soil from which they grew. The apple tree stands silent in the darkness, its branches black against the stars. Eleanor pauses beneath it, placing her hand on the trunk as she has done countless times over the years. The bark is rough and familiar beneath her palm, as comforting as the hand of an old friend. She can feel the life still pulsing within the tree, the slow, steady rhythm of a living thing at rest, waiting for spring to call it back into bloom. She stands there for a long moment, connected to this tree that has been part of her life for so long, and she draws strength from its quiet endurance. In the days that follow, the letters begin to arrive. Official-looking envelopes from Hartwell Development, from law firms she has never heard of, from the county planning office. Eleanor opens each one carefully, reads the contents with her reading glasses perched on her nose, and files them away in the desk drawer where Thomas used to keep important papers. The offers increase. The language grows more insistent. Deadlines are mentioned, consequences implied, and through it all, Eleanor continues her quiet routine of tea and garden and evening fires. The letters speak of eminent domain and public benefit, of necessary infrastructure and community improvement. They cite laws and regulations that Eleanor has never heard of, reference cases and precedents from courts in distant cities. They use words like inevitable and progress and fair compensation, words that are meant to make her feel small and powerless, words that are designed to wear down resistance through sheer repetition. But Eleanor has lived too long and seen too much to be intimidated by words on paper. She knows that behind every letter is a person, and behind every person is a choice, and choices can always be made differently. Her daughter Margaret calls, worried after hearing about the development plans from a friend in town. Margaret lives 3 hours away now, in a city where she works as a teacher and where her own children are raising their own families. She offers to come stay for a while to help Eleanor deal with the paperwork and the pressure, but Eleanor gently declines. She is perfectly capable of handling this situation, she assures her daughter. She has handled far more difficult things in her life than some men with clipboards and corporate letterhead. The autumn deepens, the leaves turning brilliant shades of orange and gold before drifting down to carpet the garden paths. Eleanor rakes them into piles, as she does every year, spreading them as mulch around the base of her roses and over the vegetable beds to protect them through the coming winter. The physical work is harder now than it once was, her back aching after just an hour of labor, her hands stiff and slow in the cooling air. But she refuses to let that stop her. Each handful of leaves is an act of faith in the future, a declaration that there will be another spring, another season of growth and bloom and harvest. The neighbors begin to notice what is happening. Word spreads, as word always does in small towns, moving from house to house like wind through tall grass. People stop Eleanor on the street to express their support, to share their own stories of development companies and lost farms, and the feeling of watching places you love be transformed into something unrecognizable. There is anger in some of these conversations and fear in others, but mostly there is a kind of weary sadness, the resignation of people who have seen this story play out too many times to believe it can have a different ending. One afternoon, as Eleanor is working near the old stone wall that marks the eastern boundary of her property, she notices something she has not seen before. A survey stake, bright orange against the brown earth, driven into the ground just on the other side of the wall. She stands for a long moment, staring at it, this small intrusion that represents so much larger an invasion. The stake is made of wood, painted that fluorescent orange that is meant to be visible from a distance, and tied to its top is a strip of flagging tape that flutters slightly in the autumn breeze. When she turns back to her work, her movements are slower, heavier, as if the stake has added weight to the air itself. More stakes appear in the days that follow. They march across the fields beyond her property, marking lines and angles that mean nothing to Eleanor but everything to the surveyors who placed them. She watches from her garden as men with equipment move across the land, taking measurements, recording data, reducing the living landscape to numbers and coordinates that can be fed into computers and printed on plans. They do not acknowledge her presence, these men, though she knows they see her watching. Perhaps they have been told not to engage, or perhaps they simply find it easier to do their work without thinking about the people who will be affected by its results. The town council meeting is held on a Tuesday evening in the basement of the Methodist Church, the same space where Eleanor attended potlucks for 40 years and where Margaret's wedding reception was held on a June afternoon that now seems like a lifetime ago. The room is more crowded than usual, filled with faces both familiar and strange, with long-time residents and newcomers, with those who support the development and those who oppose it. Metal folding chairs have been arranged in rows facing a long table where the council members sit, their faces serious and attentive, their eyes moving constantly over the crowd. Eleanor takes a seat near the back, preferring to observe before she speaks. She is wearing her best dress, a navy blue wool that she bought years ago for Thomas's retirement party, and has worn to every important occasion since. Around her neck is the strand of pearls that Thomas gave her on their 40th anniversary, and her silver hair has been pinned up carefully, though a few strands have already escaped to frame her face. She holds her purse in her lap, her hands folded over it, and she watches the proceedings with the quiet attention of someone who has learned that patience is often more effective than action. The Hartwell development representatives are there in force, with their presentation boards and their projector and their carefully prepared remarks about economic growth and community improvement and all the benefits their project will bring to Meadowbrook. Kevin Mitchell is among them, though he is not the one giving the presentation. That role belongs to a woman in an expensive suit, a vice president of something or other, whose words are as smooth and practiced as his, but carry the additional weight of corporate authority. She speaks of jobs and tax revenue and increased property values, her hands moving gracefully as she gestures toward charts and graphs that show upward trending lines and impressive percentages. The opposition speaks too, a smaller group, mostly older residents like Eleanor who remember when Meadowbrook was a different kind of place. They talk about preserving the character of the town, about the importance of open space and natural beauty, about the traffic and the noise and the loss of something precious that can never be replaced. Their words are earnest but hesitant, lacking the polish of the professional presentation, and Eleanor can feel the tide of opinion moving against them even as they speak. The younger residents, the ones who have moved here more recently, seem drawn to the promises of growth and development, to the vision of a town with more amenities and more opportunities, and more of everything that modern life seems to require. When her turn comes to address the council, Eleanor rises slowly, feeling the weight of every one of her 82 years. She does not have a prepared statement or a presentation board. She has only her voice and her memories and the quiet certainty that what she is about to say matters more than anything she has ever said in her life. The room falls silent as she walks to the front, and she is aware of all the eyes on her, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some merely curious about what this elderly woman could possibly have to contribute to a discussion about real estate development and economic growth. She tells them about her garden, not about the offers she has received or the legal threats or the survey stakes appearing like invaders on her property line. She tells them about the peace rose that Thomas planted, about the herbs her grandmother taught her to grow, about the apple tree where 4 generations of her family have carved their initials into the bark. She tells them about the evenings spent watching fireflies rise from the grass like living stars, about the mornings greeting the sunrise over rows of vegetables, about the simple, profound joy of putting a seed into the ground and watching it become something beautiful. Her voice does not waver as she speaks. She is not asking for sympathy or special treatment. She is simply bearing witness to a truth that seems in danger of being forgotten, that some things cannot be measured in dollars per square foot, that some values do not appear on balance sheets, that the worth of a place is not determined by what can be built upon it, but by what has been lived within it. She speaks of the land as a living thing, not a commodity, not a resource to be exploited, but a partner in the work of building a life and a home and a community. When she finishes, the room is quiet. Not an uncomfortable silence, but something deeper, more contemplative. Even Kevin Mitchell seems affected, though he quickly recovers his professional composure and launches into a response about progress and inevitability and the need to move forward into the future. His words sound hollow now, empty phrases that bounce off the walls without landing, and Eleanor allows herself a small moment of satisfaction at having said what needed to be said. The council does not make a decision that night. More studies are needed, they say, more community input, more time to consider all the factors involved. Eleanor returns home through the quiet streets, the autumn darkness settling around her like a familiar blanket, and when she reaches her cottage, she stands for a long moment in her garden, breathing in the cold air and feeling, despite everything, a strange sense of peace. She has done what she could do. She has spoken her truth. Whatever happens now is beyond her control, but she knows that she will face it with the same quiet strength that has carried her through all the challenges of her long life. The weeks continue to pass, and the development project remains in a state of uncertain limbo. Hartwell sends more letters, makes more offers, threatens more consequences, but nothing concrete happens. Eleanor begins to hope cautiously that perhaps her garden will be spared after all, and then, on a gray November morning, she wakes to the sound of machinery. The bulldozers arrive with the dawn, massive yellow machines that crawl down the lane like prehistoric creatures awakened from some terrible slumber. Eleanor watches from her window, still in her nightgown, her tea growing cold in her hands as she tries to comprehend what is happening. She dresses quickly, fumbling with buttons, and hurries outside to find a chaos of activity surrounding her property. Men in hard hats are everywhere, setting up barriers, unloading equipment, shouting instructions to one another over the rumble of engines. Kevin Mitchell is there too, clipboard in hand, directing the operation with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this many times before. When he sees Eleanor approaching, his expression flickers briefly before settling into the familiar mask of professional courtesy. There has been a development, he tells her, speaking loudly to be heard over the machinery. The county has approved a revised plan that includes her property, based on new survey data showing that the land is essential to the infrastructure of the project. She will receive fair compensation, of course. Everything will be handled properly. But the decision has been made, the paperwork filed, and there is nothing more to be done. Eleanor stands very still, feeling the cold November air pressing against her like a physical weight. She watches as one of the bulldozers moves toward the edge of her garden, its blade lowered, ready to begin the work of destruction. She thinks of Thomas, of Margaret, of all the years and all the love that have soaked into the soil, and something shifts inside her, a final settling into a resolve that goes beyond mere stubbornness. She walks toward the bulldozer. The driver sees her approaching, this small, silver-haired woman in her rose-colored cardigan, and hesitates, uncertain what to do. Kevin Mitchell calls out, telling her to stop, warning of liability and safety protocols, but Eleanor does not pause. She walks to the center of her garden, to the spot where the peace rose still holds its last blooms of the season, and she sits down on the cold earth. The machines fall silent. One by one, the workers stop what they are doing and turn to look at this elderly woman who has planted herself in the path of their progress like a small but immovable stone. Kevin Mitchell approaches, his face flushed, his voice strained as he tries to reason with her, to explain that she is only delaying the inevitable, that this will accomplish nothing. But Eleanor does not move. The hours pass slowly. The morning clouds give way to a thin November sunshine that does little to warm the air. Someone brings Eleanor a blanket, which she accepts with quiet thanks. Someone else brings a folding chair, which she declines, preferring to remain where she is, on the ground she has tended for 60 years, in the garden that holds the story of her life. Word spreads through Meadowbrook, as word always does in small towns. By noon, a small crowd has gathered, neighbors and friends and people Eleanor has known all her life. They stand at the edges of her property, watching, waiting, and though they do not join her in the garden, their presence is a comfort that wraps around her like the blanket on her shoulders. A local news reporter arrives, a young woman with a microphone and a camera operator in tow. She asks Eleanor for an interview, and Eleanor agrees, speaking calmly about her garden and her home and her refusal to leave the place where her life has unfolded. The story airs on the evening news, and by the next morning, it has spread beyond Meadowbrook, beyond the county, reaching audiences who have never heard of this small town, but who recognize something in Eleanor's quiet resistance that speaks to their own experiences of loss and preservation and the fight to protect what matters most. The development company retreats temporarily to reassess the situation. The bulldozers are removed, the workers sent home, and Eleanor returns to her cottage to rest and recover from the long cold hours on the ground. Her daughter Margaret arrives that evening, having seen the news coverage, and for the first time in years, mother and daughter sit together by the fire and talk not about practical matters, but about memories, about the past, about all the things that have made this cottage and this garden the heart of their family. In the days that follow, letters begin to arrive again, but these are different. Letters of support from strangers across the country, from people who have faced similar struggles and lost, from people who have never had a garden of their own, but who understand the importance of fighting for something you love. Donations appear as well, small amounts mostly, from people who want to help but do not know how, and Eleanor accepts them all with the same grace she brings to everything. A young lawyer named Sarah Chen contacts Eleanor, offering to take her case pro bono. She is fresh out of law school, idealistic and determined, and something in Eleanor's story has touched her deeply. Together, they begin to explore the legal options, to examine the county approval process for irregularities, to build a case that might, just might, save the garden from destruction. The weeks pass, and the investigation deepens. Sarah Chen is thorough, almost obsessive in her attention to detail, and slowly a picture begins to emerge. The survey data that was used to justify including Eleanor's property in the development plan has been manipulated, altered in ways that are subtle but significant. Property lines have been redrawn, measurements adjusted, And at the center of it all is a paper trail that leads back to Hartwell development and to decisions made not in the interest of the community, but in the interest of profit. But there is something else, something that no one expected. In the process of researching the history of Eleanor's property, Sarah Chen uncovers documents that have been forgotten for decades, records from a time when Meadowbrook was first being settled, before the town had a name or the valley had been carved into farms and orchards. The documents tell a story that even Eleanor has never fully known. Her garden, the quarter-acre of land she has tended for 60 years, sits upon something far older and far more significant than anyone realized. Beneath the roses and the vegetables, beneath the stone paths and the ancient apple tree, there lies a site of historical importance that changes everything. The discovery begins with a letter, yellowed and fragile, found in the county archives. The letter was written in 1847 by a man named Jonathan Hayes, Eleanor's great-great-grandfather, and it describes something remarkable. Before the first European settlers arrived in the valley, before the town was built or the farms established, this land was already sacred. The indigenous peoples who lived here for thousands of years used this particular spot as a gathering place, a site of ceremony and community and connection to the earth. Jonathan Hayes knew this when he built his home here. He had learned it from the last remaining members of the tribe who still lived in the area, people who trusted him with their stories and their sacred places in the hope that he would protect them, and protect them he did in his own way. He never developed the land, never plowed it or built upon it beyond the modest cottage that still stands today. He planted a garden instead, a living memorial to those who came before, and he passed this responsibility down through the generations of his family. Eleanor learns all this in a quiet meeting at Sarah Chen's office, surrounded by photocopied documents and historical photographs and the accumulated evidence of something larger than she ever imagined. She thinks of her grandmother, who taught her to grow herbs and told her stories about the old days. She thinks of her mother, who always said that their land was special, touched by something older than memory. She thinks of Thomas, who understood without ever being told that this garden was more than just a garden, that it held within it a trust that had been passed down through the years like a precious inheritance. The discovery triggers a new investigation, this time involving not just lawyers, but archaeologists and historians and representatives from indigenous communities who have long suspected that sacred sites exist throughout the valley. With Eleanor's permission, a careful survey of the garden is conducted, using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies that can reveal what lies beneath the surface without disturbing the soil. What they find is extraordinary. The garden sits atop a burial ground, one of the oldest and most significant in the region. The remains of over 200 individuals rest beneath the roses and the vegetables, beneath the paths that Eleanor has walked for 60 years. These are the ancestors of people who still live today, who still remember the old stories, who still carry the traditions of their culture even after centuries of displacement and loss. The news spreads quickly, and the implications are profound. Under federal law, burial grounds and sacred sites are protected from development. The discovery not only saves Eleanor's garden, but also establishes the entire area as a heritage site, permanently protected from the kind of destruction that Hartwell Development had planned. Kevin Mitchell and his company are quietly withdrawn from the project. There are investigations and hearings and consequences, though Eleanor pays little attention to these. Her fight was never about punishing anyone, only about protecting what she loved. And now, against all odds, that protection has been secured in a way more permanent than she ever could have hoped. Spring returns to Meadowbrook, and with it comes a transformation of Eleanor's garden that no one could have anticipated. Working with representatives from the indigenous communities whose ancestors rest beneath the soil, a plan is developed to honor both the historical significance of the site and the living garden that has grown above it. The burial ground itself is not disturbed. There is no need for excavation or removal, no archaeological dig that would disturb the rest of those who lie beneath. Instead, the garden becomes a place of remembrance and reconciliation, a living memorial that honors both the past and the present. Markers are placed along the paths, small bronze plaques that tell the story of the site and the people who first called it sacred. A memorial garden is established at the far end of the property, filled with native plants that once grew in the valley before the settlers arrived. Traditional ceremonies are held here now, with Eleanor's blessing and often her attendance, ceremonies that reconnect a living culture to a land that was never truly lost, only waiting to be remembered. Eleanor continues to tend her garden, as she has always done. She is older now, and the work is harder, but she is not alone. Volunteers from the community come to help with the heavy tasks, young people who have heard her story and been inspired by her example, neighbors who want to be part of something meaningful and lasting. Margaret visits more often, and the great-grandchildren who once chased fireflies through the vegetable rows now come with their own children, new generations learning to love this land that has been entrusted to their family. The apple tree still stands, and each year it produces fruit that is made into cider and shared with the community on the anniversary of Eleanor's vigil, the day she sat in her garden and refused to move. On quiet evenings, Eleanor still walks the familiar paths, still touches the roses and the herbs, still sits on the wooden bench beneath the apple tree to watch the sunset. But there is something different now in these moments, a deeper awareness of all the lives that have touched this soil, all the stories that rest beneath the surface, all the connections between past and present that she has helped to preserve. She thinks of Thomas often, of how proud he would be to see what has become of their garden. She thinks of Jonathan Hayes, the ancestor she never knew, who made a promise to protect this land and who passed that promise down through the generations until it reached her. She thinks of all the unnamed people who lie beneath the roses, whose spirits have watched over this place for thousands of years, and she feels a kinship with them that transcends time and culture and all the artificial boundaries that humans create between themselves. The legal battles continue for a while, as legal battles do, but they become increasingly distant from Eleanor's daily life. Sarah Chen handles the complications, the paperwork, the negotiations that ensure the site will remain protected long after Eleanor is gone. There are discussions about the future, about establishing a formal trust to maintain the garden, about educational programs and community partnerships and all the structures that can help ensure that what has been preserved will continue to flourish. But for Eleanor, these are secondary concerns. What matters is the garden itself, the actual living presence of the plants and the soil and the slow turning of the seasons. What matters is the morning light falling on the peace rose, the scent of lavender rising on the summer air, the taste of tomatoes warm from the vine. What matters is the sense of purpose that fills her each day when she steps outside, the knowledge that she is part of something larger than herself, something that stretches back through time and forward into a future she will not live to see. Summer arrives in full bloom, and the garden responds with a profusion of color and life that seems almost excessive, as if the land itself is celebrating its narrow escape from destruction. The roses climb higher than ever, the vegetables grow larger and more abundant, the goldfish in the pond multiply until their golden forms fill the water like living jewels. Eleanor spends long hours in the garden during these warm months, often just sitting and watching, letting the beauty wash over her like water over stones. She has learned, in her 82 years, that there is wisdom in stillness, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be present to what is. Visitors come now, people who have heard the story and want to see the garden for themselves. Eleanor welcomes them graciously, giving tours that are less about information and more about experience, about helping people feel what she feels when she walks these paths. She shows them the roses and the vegetables, the herbs and the native plants, the markers that tell the story of those who rest beneath the soil, but mostly she shows them how to slow down, how to breathe, how to let the peace of this place settle into their bones. The news coverage continues, though less intensely than before. The story has become something of a legend, an example that people cite when they talk about the importance of standing up for what you believe in, of protecting what matters, of listening to the quiet voice inside that knows what is right. Eleanor finds all of this slightly embarrassing, for she has never thought of herself as a hero or an activist. She was simply a woman who loved her garden and refused to abandon it. Autumn returns, the days growing shorter, the leaves beginning their annual transformation. Eleanor moves more slowly now, her body demanding more rest, but she still makes her daily rounds through the garden, still pulls the weeds and deadheads the spent blooms, and prepares the beds for winter. There is a rhythm to this work that sustains her, a connection to the cycles of the natural world that feels more important than ever. On a particularly beautiful October afternoon, warm and golden and filled with that special light that only autumn can provide, Eleanor sits on her bench beneath the apple tree and receives a visitor she has been expecting. He is a tall man with dark hair and kind eyes, and he introduces himself as James Running Deer, an elder of the tribal community whose ancestors rest beneath her garden. They have met before, briefly, at some of the ceremonies and meetings that followed the discovery. But this visit is different, more personal. James has come to thank her, he says, not just for protecting the land, but for something deeper. For 60 years, she has tended this soil with love and respect, has kept it alive and beautiful, even without knowing what lay beneath. In doing so, she has honored his ancestors in a way that matters more than any formal designation or legal protection. Eleanor listens quietly, touched by his words, but also slightly uncomfortable, for she still does not see herself as having done anything special. She was just a woman who loved her garden. That is all. That has always been all. But James shakes his head gently. That is everything, he tells her. Love is everything. The willingness to care for something beyond yourself, to tend and nurture and protect without expecting anything in return. This is what his ancestors did for this land for thousands of years, and this is what Eleanor has done for the past 60. The continuity matters, the care matters, the love matters. They sit together for a while, these two people from such different backgrounds, united by their connection to this small piece of earth. They talk about gardens and ancestors, about the past and the future, about all the ways that people can honor what came before while creating something new. And when James leaves, Eleanor feels lighter somehow, as if a burden she did not know she was carrying has finally been lifted. Winter comes, gentle and quiet, blanketing the garden in snow that transforms everything into a landscape of white and silver. Eleanor watches from her window, warm by the fire, content to let the garden rest beneath its cold covering. She knows that beneath the snow, beneath the frozen soil, life is waiting. The seeds are sleeping, the roots are dreaming. And when spring comes again, as it always does, everything will wake and grow and bloom once more. Her daughter Margaret stays with her more often now, concerned about her mother's age and the challenges of living alone through the cold months. But Eleanor insists that she is fine, that she has everything she needs, that the cottage and the garden sustain her in ways that cannot be measured or explained. There are moments, though, late at night when sleep will not come, when Eleanor lies in her bed and thinks about all that has happened, all that has changed. She thinks about the bulldozers and the survey stakes, about Kevin Mitchell's smooth words and the cold November day when she sat in her garden and refused to move. She thinks about the discovery beneath the soil, about Jonathan Hayes and his promise, about James running deer and his gratitude. And she thinks about Thomas, always Thomas, who planted a peace rose for their unborn daughter and who would have understood, better than anyone, what all of this means. The days are shorter now, and Eleanor's energy is less than it used to be, but she still makes her way outside when she can, bundled in her warm shawl to check on the garden even when there is nothing to be done. The snow lies deep over the beds, but she can see, in her mind's eye, exactly what is beneath. The roses pruned and mulched, the herbs sleeping, the perennials waiting, the apple tree, its bare branches reaching toward the gray winter sky. She touches the cold bark of the tree, feels the life still pulsing within it, and smiles. This is what matters, she thinks, not the legal victories or the news coverage or the recognition from strangers. Just this, the connection between a woman and a tree, between a gardener and her garden, between the living and the dead and all the generations yet to come. Spring does come again, as it always does. The snow melts and the ground thaws and the first green shoots begin to push through the dark soil. Eleanor watches from her window, then from her porch, then finally from the paths of her garden as she resumes her daily walks among the waking plants. There is a new addition this year, a garden bed established near the memorial area, filled with plants that have been grown from seeds collected by the indigenous community, heirloom varieties that were cultivated here long before European settlers arrived. Eleanor helps with the planting, her hands working alongside younger hands, her knowledge blending with older knowledge, creating something that honors both traditions. The peace rose blooms early this year, its pale yellow petals edged with pink, a reminder of Thomas and Margaret and all the love that has soaked into the soil. Eleanor spends a long time standing before it, breathing in its gentle fragrance, letting the memories wash over her like warm water. She is tired now, more tired than she has ever been, but it is a good tiredness, the kind that comes from a life well lived and work well done. She knows that she will not see many more springs in this garden, that the time is coming when she will have to leave this place she has loved so long. But she is not afraid. She has done what she needed to do. She has kept the promise. On a warm May evening, Eleanor sits on her bench beneath the apple tree and watches the sunset paint the sky in colors she has no names for. The garden surrounds her, alive and beautiful, filled with the evening songs of birds and the gentle buzz of bees returning to their hives. She can smell the roses and the lavender, the fresh green scent of growing things, the rich dark perfume of the earth itself. She thinks of all the people who have loved this land, from the first inhabitants thousands of years ago to Jonathan Hayes and his descendants, to Thomas and Margaret and all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who have played among these paths. She thinks of James Running Deer and his ancestors, of Sarah Chen and her determined research, of all the neighbors and strangers who came to support her when she needed them most. And she thinks of the future, of the gardens that will be planted here long after she is gone, of the children who will learn to love this land, of the ceremonies that will be held and the stories that will be told. The garden will continue, the protection will remain. The love that has been poured into this soil for generations will go on nurturing everything that grows here. The sky darkens slowly, the first stars emerging against the velvet blue. Eleanor sits very still, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap. She is perfectly at peace, perfectly content, perfectly present to this moment and this place that has been her home and her heart for so long. The night settles softly over Meadowbrook, bringing with it the gentle sounds of a world preparing for sleep. An owl calls from somewhere in the distance. A breeze stirs the leaves of the apple tree. The last light fades from the western horizon, leaving only the stars and the darkness and the deep quiet of a spring evening in a garden that has been loved. Eleanor closes her eyes and breathes deeply, letting the peace of this place fill her completely. She is not sleeping, not quite, but she is resting in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness. She is resting in the knowledge that everything is as it should be, that the work has been done, that the promise has been kept. The garden holds her gently, as it has always held her, as it holds everyone who has ever loved it. The roses continue to bloom in the darkness. The herbs continue to release their healing fragrances. The ancient apple tree continues to stand guard over the spot where so much love has been planted and so much joy has been harvested. And beneath the soil, in the sacred ground that was almost lost but has now been found, the ancestors rest peacefully, their spirits watching over this place that has been protected by the care of so many hearts across so many years. Eleanor sits on her bench, surrounded by her garden, wrapped in the gentle darkness of a spring night, and she is home. She has always been home, and this home, this garden, this sacred and beautiful place will be here long after she has joined the ancestors beneath the soil, long after the roses she planted have given way to new roses, long after the story of her vigil has become just another legend in the long history of Meadowbrook. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The night deepens. The garden sleeps, and Eleanor sleeps with it, at peace, at rest, at home at last. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world rests beneath a blanket of soft darkness, the garden waits. It has waited before, through all the seasons and all the years, through drought and flood and the threat of destruction. It will wait again, patient and eternal, holding within its soil the memories of all who have loved it and the hope of all who will love it still. This is the story of Eleanor Hayes and her garden. This is the story of a woman who refused to leave the place she loved, who stood against the machines of progress with nothing but her presence and her determination. This is the story of what was found beneath the roses, the sacred ground that had been protected by love long before anyone knew what they were protecting. But mostly, this is a story about rest, about finding peace in a world that moves too fast, about slowing down enough to notice the beauty that surrounds us, about planting seeds and trusting that they will grow, about loving something beyond ourselves and being willing to fight for that love. So close your eyes now and let the garden hold you. Let the scent of roses drift through your dreams. Let the sound of leaves rustling in the evening breeze carry you toward sleep. You are safe here. You are home. The garden is waiting to welcome you, and it will be here always whenever you need it. Rest now. Sleep deeply. Dream of flowers and starlight and the gentle turning of the seasons. And when you wake, remember that somewhere, in a valley where rolling hills meet gentle streams, there is a garden that was saved by love. a garden that continues to grow, a garden that will never be destroyed. Good night. The morning light returns, as it always does, soft and golden and full of promise. In the garden, the dew clings to every petal and leaf, catching the early rays and transforming the ordinary into something magical. A robin hops along the path, searching for breakfast. A butterfly, newly emerged, spreads its wings for the first time. And at the cottage with the weathered blue shutters, life continues. Margaret has moved in now to help care for the garden and the home that her mother loved so deeply. She walks the paths each morning, just as Eleanor did, touching the plants, pulling the weeds, tending the soil with the same love that has been passed down through generations. The peace rose blooms every year, its pale petals a constant reminder of all that has been preserved. New roses have been planted too, gifts from people who heard Eleanor's story and wanted to contribute something to this sacred place. The garden grows larger and more beautiful with each passing season, a living testament to the power of love and perseverance. Visitors still come, drawn by the story and staying for the peace they find here. They walk the paths slowly, reading the markers, sitting on the bench beneath the apple tree where Eleanor spent so many quiet hours. Some come once and never return. Others come again and again, finding in this garden a refuge from the busy world outside. The ceremonies continue as well, the gatherings of the indigenous community who have reclaimed this small piece of their heritage. They come in the spring and the fall, in the summer and the winter, to honor their ancestors and to celebrate the living connection between past and present. The sound of their singing drifts across the garden, ancient words in an ancient language, a reminder that this land has been loved for far longer than anyone now living can remember. And in the quiet moments, when the garden is empty of visitors and the work of the day is done, you can almost feel the presence of all who have walked these paths before. Eleanor is here, and Thomas, and Jonathan Hayes, who made a promise so long ago. The ancestors are here too, their spirits rising from the sacred ground to watch over this place they called home. They are all here, together, united by their love for this small corner of the world. The garden breathes, the garden dreams, the garden waits, patient and eternal, for all who need its peace. And so the story ends, as all stories must, but the garden goes on. The roses continue to bloom, the herbs continue to heal, the apple tree continues to stand, its branches reaching toward the sky, its roots reaching deep into the earth where so much love has been buried. Come back whenever you need to. The garden will be waiting. It will always be waiting. And when you arrive, it will welcome you home. Sleep now. Rest now. Let the peace of Meadowbrook fill your dreams. Good night.